bringing you views and ideas on critical issues facing Sri Lanka today. The Interview.
Good evening. We are speaking with Guruparan Kumaravadivel today, who's a activist and involved in the youth movement in Sri Lanka. Welcome to the program. I'd like to begin by asking you, what difference can youth make today in the context of Sri Lanka today to all that is wrong with this country?
The question is assuming as to whether there isn't already a difference that they are making. Yes, I suppose youth being an essential part of any societal makeup, and I would avoid calling them the future of our generation or future of this nation, but I would rather call them the present as well. That they are very much in the present, and their contribution should be very much in the present. In terms of bringing in new ideas, in terms of looking at issues from a different perspective, in terms of having that vibrancy that comes with them, with their age, I suppose there is a difference that you can make.
But in a culture that almost associates wisdom with age and the passing of the years, in your experience, I mean, you've been hugely involved in youth activism across a number of initiatives over a number of years, really. Are people listening to you and the initiatives you've been associated with any more than there have been any in the past, you feel?
No, generally the sort of adult society won't look at you with a lot of respect. But if you make sense, then they'll probably listen to you and find you an interesting person. But they'll stop at that, and that's a maximum they would go to. You know, this person seems to be interesting. Let's see how we can make use of it. But you're right in terms of the culture, in terms of looking at a young person. So that's why we've been emphasizing that young people, if they are to be taken seriously, that there is so much that the adult society first has to realize on their own, but I also emphasize a lot on young people themselves asserting themselves a lot. Now, this is very difficult to suggest within a youth community. Once I said this at a Commonwealth gathering of young people, and they got back to me saying,
in Sri Lanka or?
Well, this was a Commonwealth, the Commonwealth Youth Ministers meeting took place somewhere in April this year, and there was a parallel youth gathering that the Commonwealth had arranged. So I suggested that, we need to probably assert ourselves more, we need to organize ourselves better, we need to make our presence more felt. And immediately the response seemed to be, are you trying to shift responsibility in terms of who needs to do in terms of youth representation, youth activism?
The response was
from young people themselves. See, the duty lies with the adult community in terms of recognizing us, in terms of bringing us into the mainstream. Why do young people have to always assert themselves, and why do we need to always prove ourselves? Are you trying to shift responsibility?
But assertion is always not about proving oneself.
Yeah. So when you are told that you need to organize yourself, you need to get your material sorted, you need to get your house in place in terms of bettering your campaign. Then the young people seem to think there's a shift of responsibility back on them, and they're asking why. And my response is that this can't be a one-way process. This can't be about, see, for example, what Obama is telling the black people today. He's telling them that our fathers can't think that conception is the only thing that we matter, but what matters. And you get people like Jesse Jackson coming back and saying, so he's talking down on black people. But Obama emphasizes still, which I agree with him on this, is that you need to that it's a two-way process. For change to happen, that there is something that needs to happen internally as well as external forces changing as well, and it needs to happen in tandem in a process. So I think that you can't just wait for the adult community change. There is a lot that we need to do, and recognizing is part of activism.
I mean, you tend to speak of youth as a larger whole that is almost united and homogeneous, and is it the case?
It's not.
It's not. And going with that answer, I mean, you are a Tamil. You have an identity of your own, however you choose to define that identity. How is it for you as an individual to be involved in a movement that actually pushes a larger Sri Lankan youth voice? Is it conflictual? Is it challenging?
It is conflictual. It is challenging.
And how so?
And exactly the project that I got involved with the Sri Lankan Youth Parliament was about that, to see whether you see, you have different identity markers. I have an identity mark as a son. I have an identity marker as a uncle to my nephew. I have an identity marker as a Tamil, as one who speaks a language and one who identifies with that community. And I probably, questionably, have a Sri Lankan identity as well as a youth identity. So I look at being a young person as part of a whole range of identities that you can belong to.
And not the negation of any one of these, is it?
Not really, but you can give an emphasis to any of these depending on your interests and your experience. But young people, is there an experience that binds us together, irrespective of whether we are Sinhalese, Tamil, Muslim or Burghers?
And what has
is there a common experience that we go through?
Has there been? Have you been able to forge that?
And I think what we've done that I can't tell you whether we've been successful because I really don't know.
And when by we you mean?
We at the Sri Lankan Youth Parliament have tried
right.
to do, or we at Beyond Borders have tried to do, is to see whether that identity can be understood. Can young people rally themselves around a new identity called the youth identity? And is that a rallying point? This is what we've experimented with. It's been tough. There have been questions raised about me. Now, why is a Tamil leading a youth organization? What is his motives about it? So there have been questions about it. So it's difficult, but I don't think it's not possible. And young people have seen. I've heard young people within the Youth Parliament say this is a perspective that we never understood. And despite our disagreements about what the ethnic conflict is about or how to resolve it, we are still able to understand each other and appreciate each other and empathize. So that's the sort of beginning that you hope to achieve in terms of if the Sri Lankan identity formation is not working among young people, to see whether at least a youth identity formation, which would lead to a more of a trying to understand the contents of a Sri Lankan identity, would be possible through exploring youth identity.
And you mentioned the Youth Parliament and Beyond Borders. These are both institutional mechanisms. At the end of the day, would I be correct in assuming that what you're trying to do is to promote conversation and dialogue amongst the unlike-minded?
Yeah, pretty much. It's more than conversation and language. It's also, Sri Lankan Youth Parliament especially focuses a lot on getting young people to work together on issues. So if if you're a person working on youth employment issues, you share the sort of the ramifications of the issue and try to forge strategies which you might be able to share across communities and see whether that works. And that gives you a sort of a platform beyond this sort of ethnic conflict, racial, ethnic, religious divide where you can work on. So yes, conversation and dialogue is very important for that to continue, but also exploring spaces where they can work together.
And how's that been really?
It's tough. Getting people to work together is a larger problem of youth activism itself in this country.
But against the backdrop also of the condition of the country, particularly in the past few years.
Yes.
There could be identified as seeming incongruity of the dialogue, the non-violent dialogue, and the collaboration that you're trying to engender with what's happening as a backdrop in the larger ethnic conflict.
No, the ethnic conflict is an overarching problem to any social issue that you identify in this country, be it youth, be it women, be it children, be anything. Anybody writing a paper can start with ethnic conflict.
Sure, but your experience has been that you can actually talk about highly emotional, highly emotive, divisive issues, even though that there is open warfare in the background, in the work that you've done with youth.
I won't claim that. I will say that youth organizations are still to get into a sort of a space where they can get into intense dialogue. Sure. They're afraid of getting into them, right? Especially at the Sri Lankan Youth Parliament and Beyond Borders, we've been worried about our organization being very young and whether going to a level of such a dialogue would be disruptive in terms of organizational
disruptive
development.
To whom?
Disruptive to the organization as a setup. If you get identified with controversial issues which we are happy to enter into, but we are also looking at it in terms of strategy.
It could be a creative disruption, yes?
It could be a creative disruption which might lead to, however, hopeless situation where people might think, okay, these things might not work. We might not be able to get into a dialogue. It might not be possible to get into it. So we are careful of that as well. So on the one hand, yes, we want to move fast on a fast track basis to get into issues that really matter, that really divides us. Let's get to discuss that. But at the same time, we are also aware of the need to be strategic and pragmatic about our approach as well.
And on that point, you've also worked with government to draft policies. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
No. So governmental or even non-governmental, I would say, is more about young people is still a very tokenistic value. You will have to struggle. Probably, the non-governmental structure is much more willing to at least listen for a moment, whereas the government structure, we had a minister at one of a parliamentarian gathering where he said that well, this sounds good, but it won't work in Sri Lanka.
And this meaning?
No, in terms of, he said youth participation seems to be a good idea. The way you are presenting it, the way you are making a case seems to be good, but it won't work within the present system. And that's part of a larger problem where Sri Lankans are generally hostile towards change. We like to keep status quo, and change seems to be a bad idea to most of us.